She arrived in silence, carrying the weight of the streets on her shoulders. But when they tried to humiliate her in front of everyone, no one imagined the game was just beginning. The February sun beat down on Chicago as Rachel Davis crossed the main gate of Central University. With hesitant steps, she clutched her acceptance letter in one hand while adjusting the strap of her worn backpack with the other. Her brown eyes scanned the immense campus, with its imposing buildings and meticulously maintained gardens. Students walked carefree, displaying designer clothes, expensive watches, and a self-confidence that seemed part of the unofficial uniform of that place. Rachel took a deep breath. Getting a full scholarship to that institution had been only the first challenge. Surviving there would be the real test. "Hey, you! You look lost," said a female voice beside her. Rachel turned and found a young woman with curly hair displaying a friendly smile. "A little. I'm looking for the economics building," Rachel replied, trying to disguise her inner-city accent. "I'm Danielle Scott, but you can call me Danny. I'm heading there too. Come with me." As they walked, Danny explained the unwritten codes of the university, which areas belonged to which groups, which professors were admired and which were feared, where to get the best copies of the most expensive books. "What about this Professor Michael Andrews?" "I have class with him today," asked Rachel, consulting her schedule. Danielle stopped walking and looked at Rachel with an alarmed expression. "You have class with Andrews on your first day? Wow, you're going to need luck." "He's brilliant, but he's also the biggest symbol of elitism around here. Former multinational executive, Gold Coast resident, author of books about meritocracy. You know, the complete package of the self-made man who was actually born with a silver spoon in his mouth." Rachel swallowed hard. That wasn't a good omen for her first day. The amphitheater was almost full when they arrived. Rachel noticed how everyone seemed to know exactly where to sit, as if there were invisible territories marked out. She and Danielle sat in one of the last rows. Minutes later, the room's chatter instantly diminished, giving way to a reverential silence. Michael Andrews entered the amphitheater like someone taking possession of a territory. Tall, athletic despite being 50, perfectly cut grey hair and a suit that probably cost more than everything Rachel had ever owned in her life. His presence was magnetic, and even Rachel had to admit there was something imposing about him. "Good morning, future leaders of the financial market," he began with a confident smile. "Or at least some of you." His voice filled the space without need for a microphone. Rachel observed how he dominated the environment, how each gesture seemed calculated to impress. "For those who don't know me, I'm Michael Andrews, former director of Goldman & Stanley, PhD in economics from Harvard, and someone who firmly believes that the market is the best filter to separate winners from those who don't deserve to be at the top." He walked across the stage, explaining the course methodology, his high expectations, and how only the best would get the highest grades with him. As he spoke, his eyes scanned the audience until they rested on Rachel. Something in his gaze subtly changed. "I see we have some new faces this year, including some who seem to have entered here through alternative paths." An awkward silence took over the amphitheater. Some students turned to look in Rachel's direction. "Professor, about the book you recommended." Danielle raised her hand, trying to divert attention. "Of course, Miss Scott, we'll get there. But first, I believe we should conduct a small social experiment." Michael descended the steps, separating the stage from the audience, and walked slowly until stopping in front of the row where Rachel was sitting. "What's your name?" he asked her directly. "Rachel Davis," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Rachel Davis," he repeated, as if savoring each syllable. "And what brings you to my class, Miss Davis? What is your special qualification?" Rachel knew exactly what he was insinuating. News about the scholarship student who lived on the streets had circulated like wildfire among the departments. "I was approved first place in the scholarship selection process," she answered, looking directly into his eyes. A slight murmur ran through the room. Michael raised his eyebrows, visibly surprised, but quickly regained his composure. "Fascinating. So we'll have the opportunity to see how far, let's say, experience on the sidewalks can contribute to understanding complex financial markets. It will be an educational experience for all of us." Some nervous laughter echoed through the amphitheater. Rachel kept her gaze fixed, showing no emotion, although her hands, hidden under her notebook, were trembling. As I was saying before this small sociological digression, he continued, returning to the stage, the market does not forgive those who are not prepared, and neither does my course. The rest of the class proceeded with Michael presenting advanced macroeconomic concepts, frequently directing tricky questions to Rachel, who answered with precision, despite the subtly derogatory comments he added after each of her responses. When the class ended, students began to leave hurriedly. Some looked at Rachel with curiosity, others with barely disguised disdain. "Don't mind him," said Danielle as they packed up their materials. "Andrews does this with anyone who doesn't belong to his circle. Last year he humiliated a scholarship student until he dropped out." "I'm not going to drop out," Rachel replied, with a determination that surprised even herself. As they walked out of the building, a tall young man with glasses and a serious expression approached them. "Hi, I'm Leo Miller from the journalism program," he introduced himself. "I attended Andrews' class today. What he did was completely unethical. And what do you suggest? A formal complaint?" asked Danielle ironically. "Andrews is practically untouchable in here." Leo smiled slightly. "Maybe no one has tried to touch him the right way yet." He turned to Rachel. "I saw how you answered those questions. You're good, better than he expected." "Thank you, but I don't want trouble. I need this scholarship," Rachel responded. "I understand. But if you change your mind..." Leo handed her a card with his contact information. "I'm developing a piece on academic elitism for the university newspaper. Your perspective would be valuable." As Leo walked away, Rachel looked at the economics building one last time that day. Somehow she knew her battle with Michael Andrews was just beginning, and as intimidating as that man was, something inside her refused to bow her head. That night, in the small dormitory room, she shared with two other scholarship students. Rachel opened her worn notebook and began reviewing every note she'd taken during Andrews' class. No matter how much he tried to humiliate her, she would be prepared. For Rachel, that university wasn't just a chance at education. It was her only way out of a cycle of poverty that had swallowed generations of her family. "If he thinks I'm going to give up, he has no idea what it's like to survive on the streets of Chicago," she thought, as the dim light from the lamp illuminated her pages, already full of meticulous notes. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. The following weeks were an emotional roller coaster for Rachel. As she adjusted to the university routine, she noticed curious glances and conversations that ceased when she approached. The university was a territory mined with invisible social codes, which she tried to decipher day after day. The small dormitory room became her refuge. There, between peeling walls and a window that barely closed, Rachel spent the late nights studying. She slept only 4 hours a night, woke before dawn, and reviewed each concept, each theory, preparing for Michael Andrews' classes as if preparing for battle. "You need to rest a bit," commented Carla, one of her roommates, when she found her still awake at 3 in the morning. "This isn't healthy." "I can't afford the luxury of rest," Rachel replied without taking her eyes off the book. "Not when Andrews is waiting for any slip-up from me." The professor's provocations had become more frequent and specific. He seemed to have made Rachel his favorite target, directing the most complex questions at her, often accompanied by comments like, "If that makes sense to someone of your background," or "Let's see if experience on Chicago sidewalks helps understand the derivatives market." But what Michael didn't expect was Rachel's silent resistance. For every provocation, she responded with academic precision. For every attempt at humiliation, she demonstrated knowledge that surprised not only the professor, but the entire class. Her meticulously organized notebooks, her well-founded answers, and her unwavering composure began to catch the attention of her classmates. "How do you stay calm when he attacks you like that?" asked Danielle after a particularly tense class. "I learned a long time ago that showing weakness only gives more power to those who want to bring you down," Rachel replied as she packed up her materials. "On the streets, the rule is never let them know they've hurt you." That afternoon, returning to campus after a quick stop at the main library, Rachel noticed a small group gathered in the main hall of the economics building. At the center of the group was Leo, the journalism student who had approached her weeks earlier. He was gesturing animatedly, seeming to explain something important to his colleagues. "There she is," exclaimed Leo when he saw her. "Rachel, we need to talk." Before she could protest, Rachel was pulled into an empty room by Leo and his friends. Among them, she recognized Matthew Costa, president of the Social Sciences Student Council, and Julia Richards, a senior known for her activism. "What's going on?" she asked, confused. "We're organizing a dossier on discriminatory practices at the university," Leo explained, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "And Professor Andrews' behavior toward you is the perfect example of what we want to expose." "I don't want to be the face of any expose," Rachel responded quickly. "I need this scholarship. I can't risk retaliation." "We understand your fear," Julia intervened with a reassuring voice, "but you wouldn't be alone in this. Several students have already reported similar behaviors, and some more progressive professors are with us too." Rachel shook her head, uncomfortable. "What you don't understand is that for people like you, this is a cause. For me, it's survival. If I lose this scholarship, I have nowhere to go back to." A heavy silence fell over the group. Leo exchanged glances with his colleagues before continuing. "What if we could guarantee that your name wouldn't appear? That you would just be an anonymous source?" Before Rachel could answer, the door to the room opened. To everyone's surprise, the person who entered was Carl Gomez, a professor from the sociology department, known for his progressive positions. "Excuse the intrusion," he said, closing the door behind him, "but I couldn't help overhearing what you're discussing. And I think I can help." Professor Carl explained that he had observed discriminatory practices within the university for years, but never had enough evidence for a formal complaint. Rachel's case, added to other reports, could finally highlight a systemic problem. "We're not asking you to be the public face of this, Rachel," Carl explained. "But your testimony, even anonymous, would be powerful." Rachel looked at each face in that room. There was sincerity in them, a genuine desire for change. Still, she hesitated. "I need to think," she finally said. "I can't decide this now." Meanwhile, on the other side of campus, Michael Andrews entered his luxurious office. The walls were adorned with framed diplomas, photos with celebrities and influential politicians, and various awards. He sat in his leather armchair and opened his laptop. A message from Richard Montgomery, the university's president and his longtime friend, flashed on the screen. "We need to talk about the scholarship student." "Complaints are coming in," Michael frowned. How had that girl managed to attract so much attention? She was just another scholarship student among so many others who had passed through there and given up. What made Rachel Davis different? Determined to better understand who he was fighting against, Michael accessed the academic system and opened Rachel's file. The history he found intrigued him. Exceptional grades throughout high school, despite having attended one of the worst public schools on the East Side. Awards in mathematics Olympiads. A scientific initiation project on solidarity economy that had received honorable mention in a national competition. Interesting, he thought. Perhaps I've underestimated the girl from the streets. The next day, Michael's class began with an unexpected announcement. "Today we'll do something different," he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, debate. I want to see how you defend your positions when pressured." The chosen topic was meritocracy in America, myth or reality. The class was divided into two groups, one defending that meritocracy existed and worked, the other arguing that it was a flawed concept in an unequal society. "And to make things more interesting," continued Michael, with a mischievous gleam in his eye, "Miss Davis will be the leader of the pro-meritocracy group." A murmur ran through the room. Everyone knew it was a trap. How could Rachel, coming from extreme poverty, defend a system that so many believed perpetuated inequalities? When the debate began, the opposing group presented statistics, sociological studies, and economic analyses demonstrating how structural factors prevented social mobility in America. It seemed like a certain victory for them. Then it was Rachel's turn. With surprising calm, she stood up. She had no papers or notes with her, just a determined look. "The concept of meritocracy in its theoretical essence is undeniably fair," she began, her voice clear and firm. "The problem isn't with the concept, but with the distorted application we make of it in a society that confuses privilege with merit." For 20 minutes, Rachel built a nuanced argument that neither completely defended nor attacked meritocracy, but proposed a reformulation of the concept, incorporating elements of social justice and recognition of structural inequalities. She cited conservative and progressive economists, interwove statistical data with concrete examples, and ended with a proposal for a new economic model that preserved meritocracy while correcting its most serious flaws. When she finished, the silence in the room was absolute. Even Michael seemed speechless. He expected a simplistic ideological defense, something he could easily dismantle. What he received was a sophisticated analysis that demonstrated not only theoretical knowledge, but also the ability to think critically. "Well, that was unexpected," he finally said, trying to maintain his composure. "Would anyone from the opposing group like to rebut?" No one spoke up. Rachel's argument had been so comprehensive and balanced that it was difficult to find obvious weaknesses. After class, several classmates approached Rachel to congratulate her. For the first time, she wasn't seen just as the scholarship student from the streets, but as a brilliant colleague. Leo, who had watched the debate from the back of the room, approached with a wide smile. "That was incredible. Do you know what you just did? You beat Andrews at his own game." Rachel smiled discreetly. "It's not about winning or losing, Leo. It's about showing that I deserve to be here as much as anyone else." As they walked down the corridor, they didn't notice Michael observing them from a distance with a thoughtful expression. For the first time in years, he had found a worthy adversary, and that intrigued him deeply. The video of the debate circulated through the university like wildfire. Leo, without warning Rachel, had recorded her entire argument and shared it on the university newspaper's social media. In less than 2 days, the recording already had thousands of views and hundreds of comments, many coming from other universities and even renowned professors. "Why did you do this without consulting me?" questioned Rachel when she confronted Leo in the cafeteria. Her usually serene face now showed contained anger. "Because I knew you wouldn't allow it," he replied, showing no remorse. "And the world needed to see this, Rachel. Needed to see how a student from a humble background dismantled all the elitist arguments that people like Andrews used to justify privileges." Rachel ran her hand through her hair, trying to control her frustration. "You don't understand, do you? This isn't about beating Andrews or going viral. It's about me being able to graduate without drawing too much attention." "Maybe that's the problem," intervened Julia, who was sitting with them. "You're so afraid of losing your position that you don't realize the power you have." Rachel looked at the two of them, feeling a gulf of experience that separated them. How to explain to them, who grew up in stable homes, what it meant to live constantly on the edge of a precipice? How to make them understand that each misstep could mean returning to the streets? "You don't know what it's like to not have a safety net," she finally said, her voice low but intense. "You don't know what it's like to wake up every day afraid that everything will disappear." An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Leo was the first to break it. "You're right. We don't know. And it was insensitive of me to act without your consent. I apologize for that." Rachel nodded, accepting the apology, but the damage was already done. Her name was now on the lips of hundreds of people across campus, and she knew that Michael Andrews wouldn't let that go unpunished. Indeed, that same afternoon, Michael convened an extraordinary meeting with the economics department's committee. Among those present was Professor Helen Vaughan, coordinator of the social scholarship program and one of the few allies Rachel had in the university's administration. "What's happening here is unacceptable," declared Michael, gesturing indignantly. "Students recording classes without authorization, sharing content protected by copyright, distorting the academic context to create sensationalist narratives on social media." "If I may, Michael," interrupted Helen with a calm tone that contrasted with her colleague's agitation, "the video shows exactly what happened. There is no distortion whatsoever. And regarding the unauthorized recording, I agree it was inappropriate, but the university's regulations are clear. The punishment must be proportional and directed at who performed the act, not at third parties." Michael gave Helen an icy look. "I'm not suggesting punishing Miss Davis for the video, but I question the legitimacy of her permanence in the scholarship program." There are inconsistencies in her history that deserve investigation. What kind of inconsistencies? Asked Helen, raising an eyebrow. Let's just say I've received information about possible exaggerations in her life story. Michael smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes. After all, let's agree that the narrative of the girl from the streets who became an academic genius is too convenient, don't you think? Helen stood up, indignant. I'm shocked by this insinuation, Professor Andrews. Rachel Davis went through a rigorous social verification process before receiving the scholarship. Her entire history was documented and proven. Documents can be manipulated, Professor Vaughan, retorted Michael. And stories can be embellished to move selection committees. The meeting ended without a definitive resolution, but the atmosphere of tension was palpable. Helen knew she needed to alert Rachel about what was coming. Meanwhile, at another point on campus, Rachel had taken refuge in the library, her sanctuary since the beginning of the semester. Among piles of economics and finance books, she felt protected, as if the knowledge accumulated in those pages could serve as a shield against the world outside. That's where Helen found her, leaning over a thick volume of economic theory. Rachel, we need to talk, said Helen, sitting across from her. Michael is questioning your history, insinuating that you may have exaggerated your social condition to get the scholarship. Rachel slowly closed the book, her face a mask of calm that hid the inner storm. He won't find anything, she responded simply. Every word in my history is true. Every document is legitimate. I know that, affirmed Helen, but Michael has influence, and now with this video circulating, he feels humiliated. A man like him doesn't accept humiliation without retaliating. Rachel nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. For a moment she considered abandoning everything, returning to the margins of society where, ironically, she felt less exposed than under the spotlight of the university. But something inside her rebelled against this idea. What should I do? She finally asked. First, we need to ensure that your story is well documented and accessible to whoever needs to verify it. Second, it would be good to have influential allies. Helen made a significant pause. Have you thought about accepting that invitation to participate in the documentary about educational inequality? It could be an important platform. Rachel had refused several interview invitations after the video went viral. The documentary mentioned by Helen was produced by a renowned filmmaker and would be shown at an international festival. I don't want to use my personal story as a banner, Rachel responded, hesitant. It's not about using your story, but about not allowing others to distort it, argued Helen. Besides, visibility can be protection. The more well-known you are, the harder it will be for Michael to attack you with impunity. After long reflection, Rachel decided to accept the invitation. The interview was scheduled for the following week, in a studio set up at the university itself. On the morning of the interview, as she headed to the agreed location, Rachel was surprised by Michael, who approached her in an empty corridor. Miss Davis. What a pleasant coincidence, he said, with a cordiality that sounded false. I heard you're giving an interview today, becoming an academic celebrity before even graduating. Just sharing my experience, Professor, she replied, maintaining her composure. Experience, he repeated with a slightly mocking tone. You know, it has always fascinated me how certain stories gain dramatic contours when convenient. I grew up in a simple neighborhood of Chicago, but I never needed to transform that into a narrative of overcoming to advance in life. Rachel felt her blood boil, but kept her voice calm. The difference, Professor, is that you probably never had to sleep in shelters or study by the light of street lamps. Your definition of simple neighborhood must be quite different from mine. Michael's smile faltered for an instant. Be careful what you say in your interview. Miss Davis, public statements have consequences. Before Rachel could respond, he walked away down the corridor, leaving a veiled threat in the air. The interview went better than Rachel expected. The director, Lisa Campbell, conducted the conversation with sensitivity, allowing Rachel to speak not only about her difficulties, but mainly about her ideas for democratizing access to higher education. What impresses me most about you, Rachel, is how you transformed your experience of exclusion into an inclusive vision of education, commented Lisa during a break in the filming. Many people who manage to rise socially forget where they came from, or worse, deny any responsibility to those who were left behind. "I could never forget," replied Rachel. "Each person I met in the shelters, each classmate I saw abandon their studies out of necessity, each talent wasted for lack of opportunity. They are always with me." The documentary Invisible Borders, Inequality and Education in America was completed in record time and shown at a university festival 2 weeks later. Rachel's story, contextualized among other similar experiences, made a strong impact. Local newspapers published articles about the film, and the debate about academic elitism reached the pages of important communication vehicles. With the growing media exposure, something unexpected began to happen. Former homeless people who had known Rachel, social workers who had followed her during adolescence, and even teachers from her old public school began to speak out, corroborating every detail of her story. For Michael, this represented a problem. His strategy of discrediting Rachel now ran into a wall of evidence and testimonies. It was time to change tactics. On a Thursday morning, economics students were surprised by an announcement on the bulletin board. Professor Michael Andrews invited Rachel Davis to co-present a lecture on multiple perspectives in social economics at the prestigious annual faculty symposium. "This is a trap," warned Leo as soon as he saw the announcement. "He wants to expose you, humiliate you in a formal environment. Or maybe he's trying to associate himself with your image now that you're gaining recognition," suggested Danielle. "You know, riding the wave of the moment so as not to appear as the villain of the story." Rachel looked at the announcement for a long time, thoughtful. Whatever Michael's intention was, there was an opportunity she couldn't ignore. A space at one of the university's most important academic events, attended by professors, researchers, and representatives of the financial market. "I'll accept it," she finally decided, "but I won't just be an ornament for him to display. I'll prepare something that no one expects." If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. The main auditorium of Chicago's Central University had never been so full. The annual economics symposium normally attracted only students from the course and a few interested professors, but this year was different. News that Rachel Davis and Michael Andrews would share the stage had spread throughout the campus and even to the local media. Backstage, Rachel nervously adjusted the sleeves of her only blazer, purchased from a thrift store especially for the occasion. Helen and Danielle were with her, offering words of encouragement. "Remember, you're not alone up there," said Helen, helping her organize her notes for the presentation. "If Michael tries anything, I'll be in the front row and can intervene." Rachel nodded, grateful for the support, but knew this was a battle she needed to face alone. In the past 2 weeks, she had worked tirelessly on her presentation, consulting professors from other departments, diving into recent statistics on social mobility, and studying international cases of inclusive educational policies. "5 minutes until we begin," announced one of the organizers, poking his head through the door. On the other side of the stage, Michael adjusted his Italian silk tie in front of a small mirror. He seemed calm, confident, like someone accustomed to dominating any academic environment. When he spotted Rachel, he gave her an enigmatic smile. "Ready for the big moment, Miss Davis?" he asked, approaching. "Completely, Professor," she answered, sustaining his gaze. "Excellent. Remember that in this type of event, academic elegance is fundamental. No emotional speeches or excessive personal accounts. Our audience expects rigorous analysis, not stories of overcoming adversity." Rachel perceived the attempt at intimidation, but didn't let herself be shaken. "Thank you for the advice, Professor. But I think our audience deserves both, analytical rigor and human perspective. After all, economics without humanity is just cold mathematics." Before Michael could respond, they were called to the stage. President Richard Montgomery made the initial introductions, highlighting the innovative initiative to integrate different perspectives into the economic debate, as if the idea of inviting Rachel had been his and not Michael's attempt to restore his image after the viral video. By prior agreement, Michael would speak first. His presentation, as expected, was impeccable from a technical standpoint. Elegantly prepared slides showed graphs, projections, and comparative analyses between different economic models. His central thesis was predictable. The meritocratic system, though imperfect, was the only one capable of generating true innovation and sustainable growth. What we need is not to abandon meritocracy, he concluded, with the confidence of someone who doesn't expect to be contested, but to refine it, ensuring that the starting point is more equitable without compromising the excellence that brought us here. Polite applause filled the auditorium. Michael smiled, satisfied, and then announced Rachel with a gesture that seemed generous but carried a subtle condescension. Rachel rose calmly and walked to the podium. For a moment she looked at the audience in silence. It was a technique she had learned from the speech professor that Helen had recommended. Capture attention before even beginning to speak. "I thank Professor Andrews for the detailed analysis," she began, "and I agree with him on one fundamental point. The starting point matters." She made a significant pause before continuing, "But I respectfully disagree when he suggests that we only need to refine the current system. What I propose today is not a reform, but a transformation." Instead of using traditional slides, Rachel had prepared something different. On the screen appeared an interactive map of Chicago, where colored dots represented the distribution of educational opportunities throughout the city. "What you're seeing is not just a map," she explained, as she navigated through the presentation. "It's an X-ray of the structural inequality that makes meritocracy in practice a fiction for millions of Americans." In the next 30 minutes, Rachel presented an analysis that combined academic rigor with a perspective rarely seen in that auditorium. She spoke of statistics, yes, but also of the real meaning behind the numbers. She discussed economic models, but always connecting them to their human impact. And most importantly, she proposed concrete solutions. A new model of educational financing, mentoring programs between students from different social realities, and a complete reformulation of the university selection process. True merit, she concluded, with an intensity that silenced the auditorium, is not in winning a race when you start meters ahead, but in recognizing that talent and capacity are distributed equally throughout society, while opportunities are not. Our responsibility, as an institution of excellence, is to correct this imbalance, not perpetuate it under the guise of a meritocracy that, in practice, only reproduces privileges. When she finished, there was a moment of complete silence, followed by an explosion of applause. Many in the audience stood up, including Helen, Leo, and several professors from other departments. The president, seated in the front row, applauded vigorously, although his gaze betrayed a certain discomfort. Michael, who had remained seated throughout Rachel's presentation, maintained a frozen smile. When the applause diminished, he stood up for the moment everyone was waiting for, the debate between the two. "An eloquent presentation, Miss Davis," he began, with false cordiality. "Although I note a certain youthful idealism in your proposals, allow me to question. Have your models been subjected to financial viability analyses? Because such radical transformations, as you suggest, usually run into the wall of budgetary reality." It was a trap question, designed to expose what he presumed to be a flaw in Rachel's preparation. To his surprise, she smiled. "Excellent question, Professor. In fact, each proposal presented was subjected to rigorous cost-benefit analysis." Rachel returned to the computer and opened a new set of slides. "As you can see, I used the financial projection model developed by Northwestern University's own economics department, the same one the state government uses to evaluate public policies." The new slides showed detailed spreadsheets, return on investment graphs, and long-term impact projections. Rachel had done her homework, and very well. The data shows that, although the initial investment is significant, the return in terms of productivity, innovation, and reduction of compensatory social spending exceeds the costs by approximately 3.7 times over a 15-year period. An impressed murmur ran through the auditorium. Michael seemed momentarily speechless but quickly regained his composure. "Interesting approach, but allow me to be skeptical about the source of your primary data. Personal experiences, however touching they may be, do not replace rigorous academic research." "I completely agree," Rachel promptly replied. "That's why I based my analysis on data from the Census Bureau, the Department of Education, and 3 longitudinal studies conducted by this university over the last 10 years. Including, she added with a slight smile, 2 of them supervised by you, Professor Andrews. It was a direct hit. Michael couldn't disqualify the studies that he himself had supervised. The debate continued for another 20 minutes, with Michael trying to find flaws in Rachel's argumentation, and her responding to each questioning with a combination of precise data and concrete examples that humanized the discussion. By the end, it was clear to everyone in the auditorium that something extraordinary had happened. The scholarship student had not only stood firm before the renowned professor, but had, in many moments, surpassed him in analytical depth and social relevance. When the session ended, Rachel was surrounded by students, professors, and even some journalists who had attended the event. While responding to questions and receiving congratulations, she noticed Michael leaving the auditorium quickly, his face tense. "You just made history," said Leo, approaching with a wide smile. "And this time I swear I didn't record anything, although it was tempting." Rachel smiled, exhausted but satisfied. From the corner of her eye, she saw Helen animatedly conversing with the president and other members of the university administration. Something was changing, she could feel it. The space she had conquered that afternoon wasn't just hers, it was a door that opened for others who would come after her. Later that day, as she walked through the nearly deserted campus, Rachel was surprised by Professor Helen, who caught up to her breathlessly. "I'm glad I found you," exclaimed Helen, catching her breath. "I have news that couldn't wait until tomorrow." "What happened?" asked Rachel, concerned by the urgency in the professor's tone. "The president just approved your social business incubator project, the one you presented at the beginning of the semester that was stuck in bureaucracy." Rachel widened her eyes, hardly believing what she was hearing. "But how? I thought approval would take months, maybe years." Helen smiled, complicit. "Let's say your presentation today impressed the right people. The president realized that having a student like you bringing innovative projects is a golden opportunity for the university's image." Rachel felt a mix of emotions. She was genuinely happy with the project's approval, something that would benefit other students in a situation similar to hers. But she couldn't help but notice the irony. The same system that had tried to exclude her now celebrated her, not necessarily out of conviction, but out of convenience. "Thank you for letting me know, Professor," she finally said. "This means a lot. You deserve it, Rachel. And more than that, you've opened a path. Others will come through it." As she returned to her room in the student dormitory, Rachel reflected on the long journey since that first day of class. She knew the battle wasn't won. Entrenched prejudices don't disappear with one presentation, no matter how brilliant. But something had changed, and for the first time since entering that university, she felt she belonged to that place as much as any other student. The weeks following the symposium brought a new reality for Rachel. Her name circulated in the corridors with a mix of admiration and curiosity. Students who previously barely noticed her existence now greeted her. Professors invited her to academic events, and even the president mentioned her name in a speech about excellence and diversity at the university. The social business incubator, named Project Horizons, began to take shape. A room on the 3rd floor of the economics building was designated as a temporary headquarters, and a small budget was approved for initial activities. Rachel spent every free moment there, organizing documents, elaborating regulations, and recruiting other scholarship students to join the team. "You need to rest a bit," commented Danielle, who had become her closest friend, finding her working late at night. "Since the symposium, you've barely slept." Rachel raised her eyes from the papers spread across the improvised table. "I can't slow down now. This opportunity might not last forever." Danielle sat beside her, concerned. "What do you mean?" "People like Andrews don't give up easily," explained Rachel, lowering her voice. "He's been too quiet since the symposium. That worries me." Indeed, Michael's behavior had changed drastically. In his classes, he had become distant and mechanical, as if just fulfilling an obligation. He no longer made sarcastic comments, didn't provoke heated debates, and above all, no longer directed any special attention to Rachel. It was as if she had become invisible to him. "Maybe he finally understood the message," suggested Danielle optimistically. "Or perhaps he's genuinely sorry." Rachel shook her head, skeptical. "Men like him don't feel sorry. They just recalculate the route. What Rachel didn't know was that at that exact moment, in his luxurious apartment in Gold Coast, Michael Andrews was in front of his computer, reviewing dozens of old emails and archived documents. His face, normally composed, displayed an unusual tension. On his desk, a half-empty bottle of extremely expensive whiskey revealed that the night would be long. The phone rang, breaking his concentration. It was Richard Montgomery, the president. "Michael, we need to talk," said Richard without preamble. "I'm receiving pressure from all sides about your situation." "My situation?" repeated Michael, trying to buy time. "Don't play dumb. The board is questioning your conduct with students, especially after the video and the symposium. Some members are suggesting a formal investigation into your teaching practices." Michael felt a pang of anxiety, quickly replaced by irritation. An investigation based on what? On a manipulated video and the theatrical presentation of a student who is clearly seeking notoriety. "It's not just that, and you know it," responded Richard with a tired sigh. "There are accumulated reports from years, Michael. Students who dropped out, archived complaints, reports of moral harassment. I've always protected you because we're friends, and because your academic reputation brings prestige to the university. But I'm running out of arguments." There was a moment of tense silence before Michael responded. "What do you suggest I do?" "A temporary leave would be prudent. A few months of research leave, perhaps. Let things cool down." "Impossible," Michael responded dryly. "I have commitments, scheduled lectures, a book to launch. A leave now would be admitting guilt. Then at least moderate your behavior. Keep your distance from the Davis girl and any controversy. And please don't give more ammunition to the press or your internal detractors." Michael hung up the phone with more force than necessary. The mere mention of Rachel's name was enough to make him tense. How had a single student managed to so deeply shake his position, built over decades? He returned to the computer, determined to find something, anything that he could use against her. That's when his gaze fell on an old email, from almost 10 years ago. The sender was Mary Cecilia Davis. The surname immediately caught his attention. "It can't be," he murmured to himself, opening the message with slightly trembling hands. That same night, in the small dormitory room, Rachel finally yielded to fatigue. Her eyes were heavy as she reread her notes for the next day's exam. Her cell phone rang, displaying an unknown number. Normally she would ignore such calls so late, but something made her answer. "Hello? Rachel Davis?" asked a tense male voice. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Andrew Campbell. I'm a journalist with Education Portal. We're investigating a series of irregularities at Central University, and your name came up in a context you should know about." Rachel sat up, suddenly alert. "What kind of irregularities? And how is my name involved?" "I prefer not to discuss details over the phone. Can we meet tomorrow? It's really important." After a moment of hesitation, Rachel agreed. They arranged to meet the next day at a coffee shop near campus. The night was restless. Rachel tossed and turned in bed, imagining what that journalist might want. Another article about her story? Some new controversy involving Michael? Or something completely different? The next morning, she arrived at the coffee shop 20 minutes early. She chose a table in the back, from where she could observe the entrance. Exactly at 10 a.m., a man of about 40, with thick-framed glasses and a casual blazer over a t-shirt, entered the place. He looked around until locating Rachel and walked in her direction. "Thank you for coming," he said, sitting down. "As I explained, I'm investigating some questionable practices at the university. Specifically, Professor Michael Andrews' involvement in schemes of academic and financial favoritism." Rachel maintained a neutral expression, although her heart had accelerated. "And what does that have to do with me?" Andrew took a tablet from his bag and opened a file. "We found records of emails between Professor Andrews and various people over the years. Among them, an exchange of messages with a woman named Mary Cecilia Davis from about 10 years ago." He paused, observing Rachel's reaction. "Does this name mean anything to you?" Rachel felt her blood freeze in her veins. "Mary Cecilia Davis was my mother," she responded with a controlled voice. "She passed away 8 years ago." Andrew nodded, as if confirming something he already suspected. "I'm sorry for your loss. May I show you something?" He turned the tablet to Rachel. On the screen there was an open email. The sender was her mother, and the recipient Michael Andrews. The date was March 2015. Dear Michael, I know we promised never to communicate again, but circumstances force me to break this pact. My health has worsened, and the doctors don't give me much time. I constantly think about our daughter and the future that awaits her. Rachel turns 15 next month. She's a brilliant girl, determined, with a special talent for mathematics, like you. I know you never wanted to meet her, that your career and reputation always came first. I've respected your decision all these years, raised her alone, never mentioned your name to her. But now, facing the real possibility of leaving her an orphan, I implore you to reconsider. I'm not asking you to publicly recognize her or change your life. Just that somehow, even if distantly, you watch over her when I'm no longer here. Mary Cecilia. Rachel read the email 3 times, her face losing all color. Her hands were trembling so much that she hid them under the table. This can't be true, she whispered. There's more, continued Andrew gently. His response sent 2 days later. He slid his finger across the screen, showing Michael's response. Mary Cecilia, your message caught me by surprise after so long. I'm sorry to hear about your health. As for the rest, my position remains unchanged. As I made clear when we separated, I have no interest or conditions to assume the role you suggest. My life has taken a completely different direction, and any connection with the past would only complicate everything I've built. I can offer financial assistance if necessary, but under the condition of absolute discretion and no direct contact. Michael. Rachel closed her eyes for a moment, trying to process what she had just read. It was as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Her whole world, already so precarious, seemed to crumble with each word of those emails. How did you get access to this? She finally managed to ask. A source inside the university, answered Andrew. Someone concerned about Professor Andrews' abuses of power. There are dozens of compromising emails, revealing favoritism to businessmen's children, grade manipulation, pressure on colleagues. But these about you are obviously the most sensitive. Why are you showing me this? Asked Rachel, her voice almost inaudible. Because you have the right to know, and because we're about to publish an extensive report on Professor Andrews' practices. Your story, if you allow us to tell it, would be powerful. Rachel stood up abruptly, feeling suffocated. I need air, she said, quickly heading for the exit. Outside, she breathed deeply, trying to organize her thoughts. Her mother had never talked about her father. Whenever Rachel asked, Mary Cecilia would change the subject, saying only that he wasn't part of their lives. Over time, Rachel stopped asking. After her mother's sudden and rapid illness, she was completely alone, without family, without a home, without direction. They were difficult years, sleeping in shelters, working in menial jobs, studying in the few free moments. The scholarship at Central University had been her lifeline, her chance to rebuild a life. And now, to discover that the man who had treated her with such disdain, who had actively tried to destroy her chances, was her biological father. The irony was almost unbearable. Andrew reached her on the sidewalk. I'm sorry if I was abrupt, he said. I know it's a shock. What do you intend to do with this information? Asked Rachel, regaining some composure. As I said, we're preparing a report. But we wouldn't publish anything about your personal relationship with him without your explicit consent. Rachel remained silent for a long moment, thinking about the implications. Exposing Michael as her biological father would create an unprecedented scandal at the university. His reputation, so carefully built, would be irreparably shaken. But it would also throw Rachel into the center of a media storm that could compromise everything she had achieved on her own merit. I need time to think, she finally said. This changes everything, I understand. We have a week before the edition closes. Here's my card with my personal cell number. Call when you've made a decision. As Andrew walked away, Rachel remained motionless on the sidewalk, feeling the weight of the revelation she had just received. The man who represented everything she despised, elitism, arrogance, contempt for the less privileged, was her biological father. The man who had done everything to undermine her, to prove that she didn't belong in that place, shared her blood. The irony of the situation was so complete, so absolute, that it bordered on the absurd. And now, faced with this revelation, Rachel faced the most difficult decision of her life: to remain silent and protect both her privacy and the reputation of the man who had rejected her twice, first as a daughter, then as a student, or to expose the truth and deal with the unpredictable consequences. For 3 days, Rachel lived in a state of torpor. She missed classes, didn't respond to messages, and spent hours sitting at the small window of her room, looking at Chicago's horizon without really seeing it. The revelation about Michael being her biological father had shaken the foundations of her identity. On the morning of the 4th day, a firm knock on her door pulled her from the contemplative state. It was Helen. "I'm worried about you," said the professor, entering the room after Rachel's hesitant invitation. "Thought you've never missed classes before." Rachel looked at Helen, considering whether she should share what she had discovered. She desperately needed to talk to someone, but feared the consequences. "I discovered something that changed everything," she finally said, her voice hoarse from little use in the last few days. "Something about me and about Professor Andrews." Slowly, with frequent pauses to regain her composure, Rachel told Helen about the meeting with the journalist and the emails exchanged between her mother and Michael. Helen's expression transitioned from surprise to shock, and then to indignation. "My God, Rachel. This is..." Helen seemed at a loss for words. "Absurd. Ironic. Tragic," suggested Rachel with a sad smile. "Choose any adjective, Professor." "They all seem insufficient." Helen sat beside her on the small bed. "What do you intend to do?" "That's what I've been asking myself for days. The journalist wants my permission to include this information in the report they're preparing. Part of me wants everyone to know what kind of man Michael Andrews really is." She paused, swallowing hard. "But another part fears that this will define me forever. That instead of being seen as the student who earned her place on merit, I'll become just Professor Andrews' rejected daughter." Helen considered the question for a moment before responding. "You don't need to decide this now, Rachel. And whatever your decision, there's no right or wrong answer here. Just what you feel you can live with in peace." After Helen left, Rachel finally left the room. She walked across campus with no specific destination, observing students in their groups, animatedly conversing, oblivious to the turmoil in her mind. She ended up reaching the building where Project Horizons was being implemented. The room was still in the organization phase, with tables being arranged and computers being installed. Some students worked enthusiastically, discussing ideas and possibilities. All of this had started because of her. Her struggle, her effort, her vision. Regardless of who her biological father was, this was real. This was hers. At that moment, she made her decision. The next morning, Rachel headed to the economics department with determined steps. It was early. Few students circulated in the corridors. She knew that Michael always arrived at 7:30, liking to have at least half an hour of tranquility before classes began. When she knocked on his office door, she heard the familiar voice inviting her to enter. Upon seeing her, Michael momentarily froze, but quickly regained his composure. "Miss Davis, to what do I owe the surprise?" he asked with the formal tone he had adopted since the symposium. "We need to talk, Professor. Or should I call you Father?" Michael's face lost all color. He stood up abruptly, went to the door, checked if there was no one in the corridor, and closed it carefully. "How did you—" he began, his voice a hoarse whisper. "The emails between you and my mother. A journalist found them, along with other evidence of your questionable practices at the university." Michael sat heavily in his chair, running his hand through his gray hair. "What do you want?" he finally asked, defeated. "I want to understand. Why did you treat me that way from the first day? Did you know who I was when I entered here?" "No," he quickly responded. "Your surname is common, and your photo in the system was old. I only realized after a few weeks when I made the connection between your face and—" he hesitated, "and your mother. And even then you continued trying to humiliate me, make me give up." Michael lowered his eyes, avoiding Rachel's accusing gaze. "Understand my position. I built a career, a reputation. I have a family, children who believe they know their father. A revelation like this would destroy everything. So you decided to destroy me first." Rachel's voice trembled with contained emotion. "Make an example of me of how people of my social class don't belong in this place." "It was a mistake," admitted Michael, surprising Rachel. A terrible error in judgment. When I realized who you were, I panicked. I thought if you gave up quickly, if you left the university, the risk would pass. But you—" He looked at her with a mixture of reluctant admiration and resentment. "You refused to give up. Every obstacle I placed, you overcame. Every provocation, you responded with excellence. You are extraordinarily determined. Like my mother," completed Rachel, her voice softening slightly. A heavy silence fell over them. Through the office window, the first strong rays of the morning sun illuminated the environment, creating a dramatic contrast between light and shadow. "What do you intend to do now?" Michael finally asked. "Will the journalist publish the story?" "It depends on you," Rachel responded, surprising him. "On me. I didn't come here to destroy you, Professor. That's not the kind of person I am, even though you tried to turn me into one. I came to propose an agreement." Michael leaned slightly forward, interested. "What kind of agreement?" "Project Horizons needs real institutional support, not just empty promises and a borrowed room. It needs funding, structure, academic recognition. And we also need a reform in the scholarship program, so that more students from humble origins have the same chance I had. And in exchange, I'll convince the journalist to focus only on the academic and administrative irregularities, leaving our personal connection out of the report." Michael studied Rachel's face for a long moment. "Why would you do this? You have the perfect opportunity for revenge. Because, contrary to what you've always presumed about people like me, I'm not here to take what's yours, but to build what's mine. And mainly, because this university is bigger than both of us, and can really transform lives if it's accessible to all talents, not just the privileged ones." The silence that followed was the longest yet. Rachel could practically see the thoughts passing across Michael's face. Calculation, consideration, resignation, and finally, a decision. "You really are extraordinary." "Rachel," he said, using her first name for the first time, "and I will accept your proposal with one additional condition." "Which is?" "Goes that you allow me to get to know you. Not as professor and student, not as adversaries, but simply as people. Without expectations, without promises, just the chance to understand who you've become despite me." The proposal caught Rachel off guard. It was the last thing she expected to hear from him. "Why? After everything you did to push me away." "Because your mother was right about you." His voice faltered slightly. "And I was wrong. Terribly wrong." 3 months later, the campus of Chicago's Central University was buzzing with the start of a new semester. Project Horizons now occupied an entire floor in the extension building, with laboratories, meeting rooms, and a small incubator already functioning. On the main wall, a plaque displayed the names of the institutional partners, among them the Andrews Foundation for Inclusive Education, recently created. Rachel walked down the corridor accompanied by Helen, discussing the details of the new selection process for scholarship students. The program had been completely reformulated, with fairer criteria and continuous monitoring to ensure not just access, but the permanence of students. "The president finally seems committed to the cause," commented Helen, as they reviewed the list of new approvals. "It's impressive how a good crisis and some articles in the press can change perspectives." The report on questionable administrative practices at the university had been published as planned, resulting in the establishment of an ethics committee and the revision of various internal procedures. Michael Andrews had not been formally accused, but announced his early retirement from teaching to dedicate himself to social projects, a negotiated exit that preserved both his reputation and the institution's interests. "People change when they realize they have something to lose," responded Rachel, "or something to gain." Her relationship with Michael had evolved cautiously in the last few months. They weren't close, probably never would be, but they had established a mutual respect and, surprisingly, a productive collaboration around Project Horizons. He contributed with his experience and contacts, she with her vision and authenticity. The past remained as a ghost between them, but no longer as an insurmountable barrier. Upon reaching the new meeting room, they found a group of freshmen anxiously waiting. They were the new scholarship students, most coming from public schools in the inner city, all with their own stories of overcoming. "Welcome to Project Horizons," began Rachel, feeling a special warmth seeing their hopeful faces. My name is Rachel Davis, and like you, I arrived here facing obstacles that many would consider insurmountable. As she spoke, she observed each attentive face before her. She saw in them the same mix of determination and insecurity that she herself had felt on her first day. She saw dreams, fears, potential. She saw the future. What you need to understand from the start is that this university belongs to you as much as to any other student. Your place here is not a concession or charity, it's a right and an achievement. And the path we're opening today is not just for you, but for all who will come after. At the back of the room, Helen smiled, proud. Rachel's journey had transformed not just her own life, but was beginning to change the institution in ways few believed possible months before. Later, alone in her new small but comfortable apartment, which she had managed to rent thanks to the research grant she now received, Rachel observed the city through the window. Chicago stretched before her, immense and contradictory, full of barriers and possibilities. The same city that had almost swallowed her now offered her an expanded horizon. On her study desk, among books and notes, there was a framed photo of her mother. Beside it, a still-sealed letter that Michael had given her the previous week, a letter that Mary Cecilia had written for Rachel shortly before passing away, and which he had kept all these years. "When you're ready," he had said when giving it to her. Rachel still didn't know if she would ever be truly ready, but for the first time in her life she didn't feel rushed. The future unfolded before her, not as a predetermined path but as an open landscape rich in possibilities. And that, more than any other achievement, was her true triumph. As night fell over the city, Rachel opened her notebook